The Milwaukee County Courthouse is a place of absolute order. It is a building defined by the heavy weight of the law, where every word is recorded and every action is scrutinized. But on the afternoon of April 18, 2025, the order of this building was shattered by the very person sworn to protect it. Imagine the scene. Federal agents are standing in a sterile hallway. They aren't there for a trial. They are there for a man. His name is Eduardo Flores-Ruiz. He's 31, a Mexican immigrant who, the government says, shouldn't be on U.S. soil. He's inside courtroom 402 for a standard battery hearing. The agents have their warrant.
It was a perfect diversion, because the moment those agents turned the corner, the decorum of the court vanished. Judge Dugan didn't go back to her bench. She didn't go back to her chambers. She turned to Eduardo Flores-Ruiz and his attorney and did the unthinkable. She led them to a door, not a public door, not an exit the agents were watching. She opened a restricted, private jury door, a passage meant only for those who decide the fate of others. And as the plan was working. Eduardo Flores-Ruiz was behind the velvet rope of the judicial system, moving through areas where the public and the federal government were never supposed to be. Judge Dugan had used her keys, her authority, and her knowledge of the building to create a ghost. But luck is a fickle thing in a house of law. As Flores-Ruiz and his attorney emerged from the restricted area into another corridor, they weren't alone. One of the agents had stayed behind, or perhaps they had circled back. The sources tell us that the moment the agent saw the suspect in a hallway he had no business being in, the tension snapped. "Stop!" Flores-Ruiz didn't stop. He bolted. The quiet echoes of the courthouse were suddenly replaced by the rhythmic pounding of boots on linoleum. This wasn't a legal debate anymore. It was a physical confrontation. By November 2025, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security confirmed that Eduardo Flores-Ruiz had been deported. He was gone. The man at the center of the storm was no longer on American soil. For most, that would be the end of the story. The suspect was caught, the law was enforced, and the file was closed. But for the Department of Justice, the arrest of Flores-Ruiz was just the opening act. They weren't looking at the immigrant anymore. They were looking at the woman who opened the door for him. They were looking at the security footage, and what they saw would lead to a charge that would rock the foundations of the Wisconsin legal system. Next, the federal government makes a move that no one saw coming, turning a local judge into a national target for the White House. Section 3. The presidential target. It is almost unheard of for a sitting judge to be targeted. Federal prosecutors didn't just see a judge making a mistake. They saw a felony. They charged her with obstruction. The argument was simple. By diverting the agents with a false claim about their warrant and leading the suspect through a secret exit, Dugan had physically interfered with the execution of federal law. The reaction was immediate and polarized. Democrats and allies of Dugan, like Ann Jacobs of the Wisconsin Elections Commission, saw it as a political hit job. They argued the administration was trying to make an example of her, to frighten other judges into submission. They saw a woman of faith and principle being sacrificed on the altar of immigration politics. But Dugan didn't back down. She prepared for a fight that she knew would likely end her career. Coming. And with it, a political ultimatum that would leave the governor of Wisconsin with a vacancy he never expected to fill. December 19th, 2025.
A Friday that began like any other in Milwaukee, but ended with a shockwave. The federal jury had been out. They had seen the footage. They had heard the testimony of the agents who were sent to the Voss, and the GOP leadership made it clear they were making plans to impeach her. They cited the Wisconsin Constitution, arguing that a judge convicted of a felony had no legal or moral right to remain on the bench. The ultimatum was set. Either Dugan would leave on her own, or she would be forcibly removed in a spectacle that would drag the Wisconsin judiciary through the mud for months. Dugan was trapped between a federal conviction and a state impeachment. Her supporters, like Ann Jacobs, praised her for being a champion of justice, even in her darkest hour, but the writing was on the wall. The distraction she had created on April 18th had become a firestorm that was consuming everything she had built over a decade. In our final,
It was a Saturday in early January 2026. Usually a quiet day for the governor's office. But a letter arrived that would mark the end of an era for the Milwaukee County Circuit Court. Hannah Dugan was stepping down. In her resignation letter to Governor Tony Evers, she didn't sound like a woman who felt defeated. She sounded like a woman who was tired of the noise. She wrote that over the past decade, she had handled thousands of cases with a commitment to act justly, deliberately, and consistently. She spoke of maintaining a courtroom with decorum and safety. But then she addressed the elephant in the room. She admitted that the unprecedented federal legal proceedings against her had become too big of a distraction. She said she was pursuing her fight, not for her job anymore, but for herself and for the Governor Evers' office has already begun the work to fill the vacancy. The court will move on. New cases will be heard in courtroom 402, but the shadow of that private jury door remains. The sources tell a story of a woman who believed she was a champion of justice, protecting the sanctity of her court from federal intrusion. But the law, as interpreted by a jury of her peers, saw a different story. A woman who thought her robe made her exempt from the rules everyone else must follow. Hannah Dugan spent 10 years judging others. In the end, she was judged by the very system she tried to circumvent. And as she walked out of that courthouse for the last time, she didn't need a private door to hide her exit. The whole world was watching.